having fun this morning. And I think, we've heard a little bit, Tim Kitts was talking to me about this, how as writers, we appreciate that an awful lot goes into the creation of something, and the consumer of it doesn't really know that. Think of what has gone into this conference. And I think we should acknowledge David and Denise and Wendy and Nicole. How can I love someone who's watching this journey? Right? Are we on a journey? So why don't you stand, those of you who know Peter, and by the way, for hosting this is clearly a notch up. This conference is going places, right? We're at Cardis, gold seal of approval, and Cardis is moving places too. So everyone who's involved in bringing this up, please just stand and let us acknowledge you and thank you for your efforts. I have to thank you for inviting me to speak. When I got this call, would you speak about lessons you learned from politics and writing with a bunch of really cool people? I thought, well, how much do I have to pay to do that? So I really appreciate the invitation. And I also wanted to mention how much I appreciate some of the speakers. I got to hear Peter speak, and Dawn, and Karen. And I especially like Karen's remarks because she basically said everything that I was going to say. So thank you for that. And there's been a theme. I don't know if you've noticed it, but Karen touched on it. Dawn touched on getting over the fear. He said, get over the fear. Just say, I'm a poet. Well, what an interesting thing. I mean, not everybody wants to say, I'm a writer. What kind of credibility is there? I'm a writer. I'm a poet. Get over your fear. And so we've heard a lot about that. Those of us who are Christians, we believe in truth. And somebody that we all know well said the truth will set you free. Karen encouraged us to be our real selves. But the truth sometimes can go the other way. Oscar Wilde told us, make sure you make them laugh because the truth may make them want to kill you. So I'm hoping we can talk about some things today that might encourage you as a writer, encourage you beyond that, and also acknowledge that we have some fears to overcome. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to go through three major sections. The first thing is going to be to embrace our failure, not just to work through our failures, but to embrace our failure. And somebody was saying earlier today about how many drafts, it was Karen, how your first draft is never your best draft. Well, anyone who's a writer knows that you have to get through the failed drafts in order to get to the one that you like. So the first part is embrace failure. The second thing is going to be more what David invited me to speak about, specific things that maybe would be relevant to you, lessons that I picked up from politics and from writing. And then I want to introduce you to your secret. So let's talk about failure. Annie Dillard came up earlier this morning. Karen is another fan of Annie Dillard, and she's got some great things to say about the writing life. If you want to pick up a short, funny, honest book about writing, you can't do much worse than Annie Dillard, a maritimer, who really tells it like it is. And she says that, I cannot imagine a sorrier pursuit than struggling for years to write a book that attempts to appeal to people who do not read in the first place. And which of us haven't feared that? Haven't feared that, we're going to spend all this time writing, or we're in the middle of a project, and you say, it's not going to get published, it's not going to go anywhere, no one's ever going to read it. So she certainly touched a note that I can recognize. Another kind of fear, well, Don Hutchison, who spoke at last year's conference, has talked about the fear of being rejected by Canadian culture. And this is an excellent book. It's a compendium of sources, constitutional, legal, and cultural, about where we stand in Canada as Christians today. He says, don't give in to fear, but embrace it. Embrace your fear. Now, it's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it? Who wants to embrace fear? Well, this is a picture of my dad and mom after World War II. And I want to relate something that's quite personal to me, and that's just a fear that I dealt with growing up, and that's a fear that I wouldn't measure up to my father. I'm sure psychologists would have a field day with this. My dad had been captured as a prisoner of war in World War II, and spent 3.5 years as a prisoner. He suffered every imaginable jungle disease. He was forced to work as a slave laborer near the bridge over the River Kwai. And he had his appendix removed by a doctor using only a razor blade. So I was fascinated by his story, especially because he refused to tell his own story, as many prisoners of war, ex-prisoners of war do. He refrained from talking about it. And so he died when I was just age 21, and soon after I headed to Asia to try and learn more about his story. And what emerged from this was a result of my visiting the little places in Thailand where he actually wielded a pick for Emperor Hirohito. And I found places and people that had related to him. And this is an unpublished historical novel, Jade Across the Kwai. Now, if I can just diverge for a wee second here, you notice unpublished. So unpublished, well, what does that mean? Is that a failure? Charles Dickens, we heard about, it was Peter who talked about Dickens walking around the streets of London and observing. And if you want to hear about Dickens' perspective about authors, then there's an excerpt from particular papers that I just came across that might intrigue and amuse you. This is what Dickens has to say about unpublished authors. Well, he really goes the other way. He's talking about published authors here. He says, this was at a gala event that he describes in particular papers. He says, never was such a blaze of beauty and fashion and literature as appeared next day at Miss Leo Hunter's. There were hosts of local geniuses there. And more than these, there are half a dozen lions from London, authors, real authors, who had written whole books and printed them afterwards. So if you haven't had it printed afterwards and you're not published, you know where you stand in Dickens. They're not. So at any rate, I put this account together of my father's life, and he went on after getting out of prisoner of war camp to break 1,500 acres of land in northern BC. He won the world championship for alfalfa in 1958 and became a world-renowned environmentalist. So as odd as it may seem, but maybe some of you can identify with this, I shared this admiration for my father with this fear that I couldn't ever measure up. And the fear led to some good positive consequences. To be associated with people of high caliber, to be drawn to great figures, people like Charlie Kirkwood, who was a mentor of mine, who first established a law firm in Asia, and I modeled my firm after his. I went to Taiwan where I met Donna and set up this international law firm. And another person that I was drawn to, a great figure, is Bob Kelly, who's in the room today, a fellow author, a very accomplished businessman who worked in over 60 countries, multilingual, who worked for the Canadian Foreign Service behind the Iron Curtain. And Bob was my boss when he set up the Canadian Trade Office in Taipei. Bob also, among his exploits, kayaked across Canada. Yeah, I said it, it's true. He kayaked across Canada. You look at the map, he'd say, how would you ever do that? Read his book. He talks in his book not only about the heroic exploits, but he also talks about his failures. And it strikes me that the people that I'm most drawn to, the people who have the most to teach in life, aren't the ones who just have the successes, but somehow they've dealt with failure. They've managed failure, they've extruded from failure the lessons they need to take them to the next level. So you see where I'm going with this about embracing failure. And Bob's very modest, but his book is well worth reading. So when we talk about failure paralyzing us in life, preventing us from going on to be the more adventurous us, we can certainly apply it to us as writers. I mean, how many of us have considered writing an article or a letter or a book or a poem, but feared failure, feared somehow that we wouldn't quite fit in? Let me tell you about when I was first elected as a member of Parliament in 2008. I loved writing poetry. Never be in Don's category, but I loved writing poetry, and it was a way that I enjoyed expressing myself. But something told me my image of a parliamentarian was somebody who gave these Churchillian speeches, was a little bit somber, and for heaven's sakes would never express himself with poetry. One of my mentors and a friend was a former pastor at Weston Baptist Church named Jonathan Michael. He's now into life coaching. And Jonathan took me aside at one point. He said, "Hey John, why are you writing poetry?" I said, "Well, Jonathan, MPs don't write poems." He said, "Why not?" So happily, Jonathan talked me into it. And so I went back to writing poetry. Now, not all of our instincts of fear are bad instincts, and sometimes maybe we should listen to them. You know where this is going. So my first attempt was this little limerick, and it was about a certain budget that was delivered by a certain late finance minister, and I read it in a certain national caucus in front of a minister and a few other people. Let's just say that the first bad effort didn't deter me. And there came along another occasion when a poem was just the right way to respond. I was on a private trip overseas with my son Jake. He was there on a soccer tour. And we were in the UK, and suddenly, no notice at all, my retina became detached. And so I had to evacuate and head right back to Vancouver. Donna flew from Ottawa to meet me at the Vancouver airport, and I met my new best friend for life, Dr. Andrew Merker, who was an eye surgeon who spent several hours the same day operating on my eye. And by the way, if you ever have to go through this, you're conscious the whole time. It's quite something. The doctors are talking about their kids' allowances and their working situation and who has the wee hours of the night to work in, and you're lying there saying, "Help me, just fix my eye." His prognosis wasn't good, and the vision in both my eyes was threatened, and happily things went way better than he had feared. But how was I going to communicate with my constituents that I was out of commission and possibly going to become blind? Well, as you've guessed that I wrote a poem, and it was called Celebrate the Night. And the poem talked about the things that I experienced, the unexpected benefits of an unexpected setback. Having to lie on my back for 5 days, not working. Wendy will tell you that was difficult for me. Feeling the sun on my face, listening to the quiet, listening to books on tape. Those were incredible benefits, and I was fortunate that I was able to see that and to communicate it in a poem, and it just seemed to be the right way to get across a message that was truly from my heart, that wouldn't have worked in just prose. Another occasion came along. It was near Christmas 2014, and a beautiful little 7-year-old girl in our riding, Erin Moore, was hiking in Lions Bay, just out of West Vancouver. Rocks were dislodged and crushed her and killed her. The whole community was distraught. And as MP, I didn't know what to do or what to say. But there came a poem. It was called The Angel-Sized Void. And I'm really grateful to say that it seemed to provide a little bit of comfort to the Moore family and to the hundreds of mourners who attended the memorial service where it was read out. So I had to overcome a certain kind of fear, to express myself in a way that seemed a little bit unorthodox. And as a writer, I think it's something that we have to work with. We have to embrace the failure in order to get to those moments. And remember, the first one didn't go so well. So let's talk now about writing a book. My cousin Greg Weston has published a couple of these. And Greg has 2 rules about writing books. How many people in the room have written a book, by the way? A lot. Yeah, this room is filled with some pretty cool tell, and a lot of books out there to prove it. Anyway, Greg's 2 rules. First rule, don't do it. And the second rule is, if you break rule number 1, throw a party for your friends, say goodbye, go away for 6 months, and get it out of your system. After the October 2015 election, I had resolved I was going to go away and write a book. And the election didn't go exactly the way that I had wanted it to. October 19th, I, having won 2 terms of office and very much enjoyed serving, was crushed in the 2015 election. It was incredible how that red wave just sort of swept across and caught people, and maybe a good thing for some of you, not such a great thing for others of us. But at any rate, my commitment was I would go away and write this book. So imagine you're at our kitchen table on October 20th, 2015, and there's Donna and our friend and senior campaign advisor, Ed Arundel. Ed had worked for Prime Minister Mulroney. He had worked for Tony Clement when Tony was the health minister for Ontario, and had led the office, the Toronto office of Hill and Knowlton, one of the country's top government relations firms. So Ed's a very smart guy and a close friend of ours. He slept on a couch in our house for several election campaigns. And Ed listened as I came in from having taken my little thank you sign and standing a bedraggled loser at the foot of the Lionsgate Bridge to thank all the constituents for the 7.5 years. And I came and I said, okay, so now Donna, you're off to Ottawa with our kids. I'm going to head, do my book in 2 weeks. Ed says, listen, it's October, it's gray outside and it's raining. You just lost your job, your wife is heading off to Ottawa, and you're going alone to write a book. Why don't you just end it all right now? So, fortunately, we had the good sense to listen to him, and we just took off on an impulsive little trip to Mexico, so there's 5 days of recuperation. That's when Stephen Harper caught up with me on a phone call to commiserate about the election, and I said, well, Prime Minister, I hope that, like me, you're able to take a week off from work. He said, a week? It's going to be a whole lot more than that. And of course, that was prophetic, because we know he subsequently resigned from Parliament. Anyway, I was convinced I was going to go away and do my book, and I was going to disprove everybody who laughed at me, including Bob and Greg and others. In 2 weeks, that's all I need. In fact, I'd spent several years accumulating the ingredients of this book, which started off as letters to my children. And by the way, Shane is here today. Thanks for joining us in May. Very proud, of course. Anyway, 2 weeks was all I was going to need. And it took 18 months, 23 drafts. 23 drafts? I mean, how incompetent could anybody be? and 2 editors, including Bob and David Winkle. So I'm telling you, this is truly the 500-pound gorilla writing the book. And if you want to grasp and embrace some fear, then disregard Greg Weston's rule number 1 and jump right in. So there it is, on achieving excellence in leadership. And you know, it gave me the opportunity to not just think about problems in leadership in Canada and the Western world, but to actually write my feelings and to address 8 values that, in my opinion, could change our whole society, change the way we do things, change the way our leaders serve. It gave me an opportunity to speak to students around the country, something that I love doing. And it gave me a new sense of self-confidence that opened the door to doing various other things. And you may think that I went overboard in this, but in terms of the retooling part, the very specific commitment that I was going to take on new challenges, hiring a drama coach, Jay Humberger, great name, director of the Theatre in the Raw in East Vancouver, Some of my best memories of the year of living dangerously was climbing up the rickety wooden steps to his office above the newly opened marijuana shop. Or hiring somebody a little better known, Jamie Watt, the head of Navigator, whose company is renowned for pulling distressed politicians out of their problems. I wasn't a distressed politician so much, but I wanted to find somebody who was going to be the best in the country for improving my game in terms of communications, in terms of government relations, and the things that I was committed to do. And against all odds, I took the 1,200-page syllabus that you have to do to repass the British Columbia bar exam, and defied Shane and May's expectations, actually passed, and then got going again in Indigenous law and government relations. So I put a lot of this on doing the book and overcoming the fear. But listen to what Annie Dillard has to say about it. Don't you love this quote? I do not so much write a book as sit up with it as a dying friend. I hold its hand and hope it will get better. So I'm telling you, at draft number 15, I was holding its hand and I didn't think it was going to get better. All right, well, let's touch on some specific lessons that emerged from my career in politics and working as a writer. First thing, well, again, going back to Dillard, and where's Denise? Is Denise here?
No.
So Denise O'Leary last year, I remember her distinctly saying to us that if you have trouble writing at the end of the day, then change your schedule. Get up early, write, and get on to your other things. Did anybody remember her saying that? Yeah. So one of the things Dillard says is you just got to get to work. She says your work is to keep cranking the flywheel that turns the gears, that spin the belt, and the engine of belief that keeps you and your desk in mid-air. For me, that means put it in your schedule. It sounds way better the way she puts it. But that's the point. You got to get it in your schedule, and if you don't do it, then there's a million other things that can crowd you. One of the questioners who asked Karen a good question said, well, what happens when I'm supposed to be doing my writing and someone phones me or someone comes over and wants to have tea or whatever? No, got a meeting, I'm committed. Maybe you have to leave the house to do it, but get it in your schedule. So lesson 2 for me was find writing mentors or encouragers. And we've heard this in different ways all day today, how important it is to be with writers. You're doing it right now. You've taken a risk by coughing up your $50 and spending your time to come to this conference. Why? Well, among other things, I think it's because you want to be with other writers. And by the way, it's going to be 500 by the time this is done. This is such a great conference. But you get encouraged by other people. Mark Whittall, who's with us today, the pastor of St. Albans, and the author of 2 books that he mentioned earlier, he got me involved in what you might think to be the most trivial little group of writers. It was called the Writers' Table, and Mark and I would ride our bikes to the Byward Market to have coffee with other writers. We would introduce ourselves, and then for 40 minutes we'd quietly write. After it was done, we would explain to the others at the table what we had just done, and then we'd be off in our different directions to go about our day. It was such a small thing, but I'm grateful to Mark for getting me involved. I looked forward to that day. I looked forward to that meeting because I was with other writers. And it made me accountable. And it really helped me move through the doldrums when I was around that draft number 15. And this is another thing that I think is really, really important. I can tell you after the October 2015 election, my heart wasn't in it, but I targeted the things that I really needed to improve upon to get me to the place that I wanted to go. Karen did a 2-year program at a university in Dalhousie. Yeah. Now, you can imagine that took a lot of thought, a lot of negotiation with the family, and it was a big risk, but she wanted to raise her game. And so I mentioned some of the things I did, getting Jay Hamburger involved, Jamie Watt, taking the bar exams, just doing some very specific things that related to what I wanted to achieve, because I didn't want to be a good speaker or a good writer. I wanted to be a great speaker or a great writer. I'm not there yet, but I decided that there were some skills that I really needed to cultivate, and I took measures to do that. I don't know if any of you know Jim Collins. He's written some terrific books. In fact, taught Donna when she was at Stanford Business School. His well-known business book is Good to Great. And this is what he says about goodness and greatness. Few people attain great lives, in large part because it's just so easy to settle for a good life. And I think as writers and as people, as Christians, we need to get beyond good and always be aspiring to great. So this is an interesting approach. Reframe your impediments that sap your energy. At a recent meeting at our home just a couple weeks ago, we had Donna's Stanford Alumni Club over and showed a video with two props. They've written a book called Design Your Life. And their major theme is that time management isn't the thing that's going to move you on, it's energy management. Interesting, right? And so what they say is this, that come up with different concepts that will help you get to where you think you should be. They use the term prototypes. And when you reach impediments or problems, we'll try to reframe them. So Denise's perspective on getting you to do the writing that you ought to be doing was to reframe the sequence of events in your day. Because maybe you have more energy early in the morning than you do later in the evening. Maybe you could do things later in the evening that you would otherwise do in the morning. Reframe. So this is a valuable exercise, and I think you'd like the book, Designing Your Life. And here's what I learned from Jay Hamburger. I'm sure you were all just burning with curiosity. Who's this guy with the name of Jay Hamburger? I would be in front of him delivering an underwhelming little talk, or we'd be in the middle of something, and then he would stop and he'd say, "Hey, John, what's at stake? What's at stake?" What a great question. We're going to get back to you, Mark, in just a second, but let me finish with Jay. At the time, I was trying to expand the National Health and Fitness Foundation. This is a foundation that I created after Nancy Green-Rain and I got a bill through Parliament to create National Health and Fitness Day. The day is the first Saturday in June each year, and it's there to get cities and indigenous governments and provincial governments to proclaim so that their citizens will become more physically active. We're now up to 308 cities that have proclaimed National Health and Fitness Day. So what? So what? What's really at stake here? That's what Jay would ask. What's at stake is that we have over 90% of children in Canada who don't get 6 hours a week of physical activity. What's at stake is that a third of those children are now overweight or obese, which means they have 14 times the likelihood of a cardiac event by age 50. What's at stake is that cardiovascular disease is spiking along with diabetes, and our healthcare costs are going with those trends. $7 billion a year we spend due to the results of sedentary behavior. Now that's what's at stake. So whenever I'm in meetings talking about health and fitness, I try and keep my mind on what's at stake. Because if I don't, then I'm going to hear Jay Hamburger's voice in my head. John, what's at stake? In his book, Mark talks about what's at stake. He's writing to pastors in his book, Reimagine. But I would like to think that his words are relevant to us as writers generally, as Christian writers. Here's what he says. The stakes are high. The meaning we seek in preaching or writing is not mere human invention nor social convention. Our goal is not so much to make meaning as to tap into the very source of meaning itself, and to do so in a way that engages the gathered community, is relevant to its lived context, and opens up the potential for transformation. That's what's at stake for Mark when he's writing or when he's preaching. So, last little tip in this group of 6 is about your audience. I remember when I was really at a low in doing the book. And it was serious. I mean, I put in so much time. I told all these people I was going to get this blessed book done. And it looked like it was going nowhere. And I really couldn't figure out what the problem was. Well, one Sunday I was driving home from church, and I turned on CBC to catch Eleanor Wachtell's tremendous program, Writers and Company. Anybody listen to Wachtell, to that show? Yeah? I love her voice, for starters. It's just such a great radio voice. But she has this great way of putting writers on a throne and somehow making them really special. And in this particular moment, the person was Anne Giardini that she was interviewing. Giardini is the chancellor of Simon Fraser University, a lawyer, and an author. The key thing about the interview wasn't the book that Giardini had succeeded at, but as I turned on the show, it was about the book that Giardini had written and shelved. Because she said she'd lost track of her audience. And as I was listening, I almost drove off the road. Because remember how the book began? It was letters to my children about lessons in politics. And I was sitting listening to Giardini speak to Wachtell, and I'd forgotten who my audience was. Now, what's interesting, and by contrast, is Giardini has this book that's very successful. It's an edited version of letters her mother wrote about writing in life. Her mother's a famous writer. Now, this isn't to say that the book is only of interest to people in the Giardini family. It's to say that because the audience was so clear, there's a coherence to the book. There's a coherence to the tone. There's a consistency there. And what those things give you as a writer is strength and confidence. And so I got back to writing my own book, remembering what my audience was. It doesn't mean that it's only Shane and Jake and Maymay who hopefully will read the book, but by writing clearly in words that would be appealing to teenage children at the time, I had a clear sense of who my knowledge or my audience was. And that's something we've got to remember. So let's just go through the 6 again. Remember, number 1, get it in your schedule to write. Because if you don't, then other things will intervene. Secondly, remember the importance of writing mentors and encouragers. I did mention this, but in the integrity chapter of my book, there's a discussion of 3 guys who were really important to me during my time in political life. David Collins, Bill Lee, and Will Johnston. These are really smart, confidential Christian guys who would pray for me. We would meet once every 3 months or so. They'd be available by email and by phone. And more importantly, even when they weren't interacting with me, I could anticipate what they would say and how they would counsel me. So these 3 wise men, as they inevitably came to be called, were really influential and very important mentors and encouragers to me. Third is take specific steps to improve your skills. So figure out what skills you need to improve and then work on them. Invest in them. Get your husband or your wife or people in your family to help you do what Karen did. Go away and take a program. Reframe impediments and problems that sap your energy. Don't let them just sit there and continue to do so. Number 5, don't forget what Jay Hamburger would say. Remember what's at stake. And then, above all, keep track of who your audience is. Okay, so we've talked about embrace the fear. We've dealt with some specific things that you can do to go from good to great. And now we get to do the best part. Let's talk about your secret weapon. Annie Dillard, she says, there's something you find interesting for a reason hard to explain. It's hard to explain because you've never read it on any page. There you begin. There's something unique about what you have to say that's stirring you to write. What is that uniqueness? And why is that important? Well, you have a faith. There's 2 components to your secret weapon. And so like one of my favorite characters in the James Bond film, Q, I'm going to equip you with your secret weapon. So the first component is your faith. Now what's really intriguing and interesting about a person of faith is that a person of faith has a perspective that's way longer than a person without faith. So when someone else sees injustice, tragedy, oppression, we see God's plan. And we all know that there are lots of fears to be dealt with in our lives and in the lives of people around us. You will die. You will get sick. People you know are sick. And there are countless other tragedies that we can dwell on, but there's something special about people of faith that we have, and we must never underestimate this, that we have an infinite perspective, not just a temporal perspective. Jeremiah put it well, and this was a verse that a pastor gave me when I joined First Baptist Church. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Now I've got a really important question for you. Why is there a bullfrog on the screen? Because Jeremiah was a bullfrog. All right, if you're under 40, you don't know that. The second component of your secret weapon is your writing gift. Remember, there's two parts to this. And here's something that I think David Kitts has shown us really well. His perspective in this award-winning book is very, very distinct. He takes us through the week of Jesus' life before Jesus died, through the eyes of the Roman soldier who participated in the crucifixion. And I'll tell you, if you read the book or listen to the book on tape, by the time you're done, you'll almost be able to smell the robe of the Roman soldier. It's that good. He's got a very distinct perspective. He has a writing gift. You also have a writing gift. So this is maybe the one takeaway that I hope that you can remember. Because it came to me as I was putting this talk together, how special we are, our secret weapon that only people in this room have. You have both faith and writing skills. And that puts you in a special place, equipped with an eternal perspective and the ability to communicate that perspective. You are stronger than a person without faith who can write, and stronger than a person with faith who can't write. Just stop there. But that's what I think is really our secret weapon. That combination of things makes us really powerful. Gives us an opportunity to make history, to influence the world. Alexander Solzhenitsyn made a big impact on me. He talked to Harvard in 1978, giving the valedictorian graduation speech. And the speech was supposed to be great praise for the West, but he surprised everybody by saying no. He couldn't suggest that Western democracy and values were a model for people in Russia because of the moral decay of our society. It's a ringing speech that shook a lot of bars. He also said in Gulag Archipelago that you are a center of the universe. Not the center of the universe, but a center of the universe. And your centrality is amplified by your ability to write. You have a secret weapon. So let's put the three pieces together. Embrace your failure, your fears, work on specific skills, and use your secret weapon. One of Canada's favorite leaders, Preston Manning, wrote this book last year. And I had the honor of reviewing it in Convivium. It's really an insightful book. It takes characters in the Bible and looks at them as political actors. And Preston makes no bones about his faith. He's beyond politics now. He can just say it like it is. This is what I believe. These are the characters that are historical for him. Really interesting read. And in the book, he does a good job of tying up these three pieces. I'd like to get back to something that Karen quoted earlier. This is from Dillard. It's interesting that the two keynote speakers both came upon the same quote. The impulse to keep yourself what you learned is not only shameful, it is destructive. Anything you do not give freely and abundantly becomes lost to you. You open your safe and find ashes. So there's a responsibility that comes from having this secret weapon. You can't just put it in your back pocket and keep it there. You got to do something with it. Preston was famous for saying, I don't want to run a think tank. I want to run a do tank. The do tank. So what do we do with our secret weapons? Well, remember first that behind every triumph, there's a vanquished fear. You got to get over the fear to get to the triumph. And in front of your every future achievement stands a fear to be vanquished. So if you're setting your sights on something that you want to achieve as a writer or as a person or as a Christian, you can bet that there's some fear that's going to get in your way. And it may win if you don't vanquish it. So you got to do something. And my suggestion is this: if there's a book or a letter or an article or a poem in you, get out there and write it. And don't let the fear win. Thank you, and happy writing, everybody.